This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux In-Laws, Season 2, Episode 15. Martin, how are things on this very fine day?
Yeah, things are fine. Looking forward to tonight's episode, since you are somewhat close to this subject
You mean
at the moment.
You mean FLOSS in healthcare?
Yes.
Excellent. Like everybody else who's wearing a pacemaker, has some implants, all the rest of it. Martin, what about you? You're not wearing any implants?
No. Fillings, unless you count fillings as implants, but yeah.
So it'll affect you in about 2 or 3 years' time when you had your first one. Hopefully not a pacemaker or something, but jokes aside, more on this later, people.
Who knows?
The subject of tonight's episode is actually FLOSS in healthcare. So, Martin, I think for the further discussion, we should set the scene. What exactly we mean by healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare obviously is a big
Indeed
topic, category, whatever you want to call it. Which spans from research, drug development to patient care, all that kind of stuff, right? So there is a wide spectrum of places where open source software can be used in this process.
And so we're going to cover some government institutions, which are very active in the field, but also some companies, who, by the way, haven't sponsored us, full disclosure.
Oh.
No. Not to worry about this.
Oh,
okay. You want to give it a go, Martin, or should I start?
Oh, you can start if you want to.
Okay. The most active field is probably on the planet is probably actually the US of A, as in the United States of America. 2 or actually 3 institutions come to mind. The National Institutes of Health, the Center for Disease Control, and
well, of course,
the Department of Health and Human Services, of course.
Human Services.
Yes. These are all government institutions, so by definition, the software has to be in the public domain. And for those listeners who haven't listened to the episode on software licensing, we should probably define what a public domain is, as the software being in it.
I'm sure everybody's listened to this episode. It's was that season 1? Yeah, that was season 1, wasn't it?
Ancient, yeah, exactly. So for those like myself who keep forgetting things, public domain means the source code is out there. Because it's funded by the taxpayer, the source code is available. That doesn't necessarily imply certain license restrictions like copyleft or permissive. It just means that the source code is available because the US taxpayer has funded this by his or her or its hard-earned dollars. The most active of them all would probably be the CDC. Links, of course, will be in the show notes. For those people who do not know what the CDC is, the Center for Disease Control is probably and I understand to be corrected, details may or may not be on Wikipedia pages, is probably the biggest health organization in the US with, I think, $11 billion annual funding.
Nice.
The idea behind the CDC is to keep diseases, hence the name, in check. So they were on the forefront of not only what's what I'm looking for, recommending COVID constraints, but also taking a closer look where it actually comes from and all the rest of it. So this is the CDC in terms of, as the name implies, it's essentially the government organization caring about public health in general and maintaining it, of course, and that's the precise thing. Now, during the preparation for this episode, I came across quite a few active GitHub repos. Links, of course, will be in the show notes, or a link to the overall GitHub repo will be in the show notes. Most of the software available centers around big data, genome sequencing, as you probably have guessed, or would guess, rather.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the whole genome sequencing is clearly a busy one, but there's also the whole imaging side, right? Where people have built many AI projects. However, there are also the more mundane solutions to like OpenEMR for health records, stuff like that, right?
Yes. Image recognition and image processing comes actually second. That's correct, yes. One probably qualify this remotely as kind of machine learning to some extent, because if you're trying to recognize an image, that's not too far off from machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
For want of a better expression. Of course, we will be crucified. If you have a different opinion, feel free to send us feedback. The usual email address applies.
Yeah, I mean, these image applications are very relevant because they are clearly, I mean, I don't know what the state is in other countries, but, the healthcare is always under pressure. So if you can get a machine to diagnose images for cancer and this, that, and the other, then that makes
Exactly.
perfect sense, right?
That goes for the mundane bone fracture, I reckon, where technology keeps advancing all the time. As I found out last year, details may not be in the show notes, because it's a long and sad story. Anyway, it doesn't matter. To kind of much needed, as Martin already hinted at, image recognition for cancer and other vicious diseases. So there's a whole spectrum, and probably most people are not even aware if they are entering an MTR tube or something like that actually on the backbone, there's quite a sophisticated software stack running, containing much open source. Because if you take a look, and that software, because it's most of the time it's proprietary in terms of it comes from the MRT manufacturer. They build it into their stack and they won't release the stack, of course. That's the trouble. But if you take a look actually at an MRT imaging output, you almost get, I wouldn't say recommendations of what's wrong in that image, but it's not too far off, making the job of the quack quite an easier one than about kind of 10, 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't remember when it was, but it's got to be more than 10 years ago when the accuracy of the cancer diagnosis was, for example, surpassed the humans species quite easily.
Yes,
as well as the output, of course. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. Next comes, with regards to activity on places like GitHub and so forth, the Department of Health and Human Services, again a significantly funded U.S. government agency. Details maybe on a Wikipedia page, but they are quite active in the open source area as well with regards to the subjects we kind of just discussed. What is interesting is actually that the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which is essentially the umbrella organization of any health institutes in the US, do have a GitHub repo, but it's an enterprise one, and there's no public source code available, which poses an interesting question because all these NIH institutes are funded by the taxpayer as well. So that raises the interesting question: why is the software not in the public domain if it's taxpayer funded?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we've had this. That doesn't just apply to healthcare, right? It applies to any other government departments as well. That.
I get that you won't find any relevant piece of code of the Department of Defense on GitHub, goes without saying, and I can totally see the reasons why. But given the fact that this is quite the opposite of the DoD, the question begs why in the first place.
Yeah. Did you get to any conclusions about what is the case?
Good question. So, if you're listening, NHA, the email address is feedback@linuxsignals.eu. Needless to say, if you want to be on the show and explain yourself, by all means, just get in touch. No, jokes aside, it would be really interesting to see the reason why they publish so little source code, or maybe it's just hidden in some castle guarded by saber-toothed tigers and crocodiles in the moat and what have you.
Yeah, I guess they all need some healthcare as well. crocodiles and saber-tooths.
So, Martin, what about the lovely UK, as in the United Kingdom, while it still exists?
Well, I mean, the NHS have a
Yes, that comes to mind.
the National Health Service, as they are.
Indeed.
But I mean, the NHS is one part, right? Clearly, they are the people that look after the majority of the population in terms of health. But there is also clearly the research side with the universities, the medical centres that use these things as well. Going back to the NHS, though, they like all other UK government organisations, they have a clearly publicised open source policies or guidelines for the use for the open sourcing of software that's being developed and so on. So it's a very much a part of the UK's open source first program in a way.
What's the UK's open source first program? You probably should explain that because not everybody would know. Listen to the podcasts.
Yeah, so some time ago, the UK government published a paper saying that and a guidance to all the departments to say if you need a piece of software, look at open source first, and if there is not a good reason not to use it, then go for the open source alternative. Really,
which only applies to software being used, not software to being.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the fact is that all the departments use a massive amount of software, whether it's legacy or not, and so yes. And then there is obviously the development of new applications and other applications that being built, but the fact remains that there is a open source first, the whole, I mean, it's called digital transformation, which has been going on for at least 10 years, I think, that all these departments are kind of going around, where they can to replace legacy software with open source. And NHS is one of them as well.
I mean,
but it's easier said than done, right? But anyway, sorry, carry on.
The NHS is a massive organization. I mean, similar to the Greek text processing system. I think about 2/3 of the overall working population of the UK work for the NHS in some fashion or another. Or am I wrong here, Martin?
I don't know the exact numbers, but it is probably the largest employer in the UK. For sure.
No, I reckon it would clock in among the top 10 in the public sector anyway, in the US.
Well, no, it's clearly the largest one in the UK, right? It's going to be bigger than defence or whatever.
Wow.
Schools, education,
That says a lot, right? I mean, defence, education, mind you. There you go.
Well, you only need one teacher for like 30 people, right? So
that's true.
You need many nurses to look after one person.
Well, that's true. Yes,
because you got shifts and all that kind of stuff, and so on. So
but I mean, given the recent press, and when I say recent, I'm talking about the last at least 20, 25 years. There hasn't been the greatest about the public health system in the UK, I suppose. But that's probably a subject for another episode.
Oh yeah, for sure. There are, like any government organization, they have budgets and they have salaries to pay, and people are not happy with their salaries and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's people go on strike even, which is
in the UK.
Indeed, it's
the king's subjects. There you go.
It's a new thing. It's maybe people went to France too often on holiday.
Martin, maybe the change of the reign has something to do with it. I don't know. Maybe
no,
just happy with a king rather than a queen. Speaking,
I think it is more the fact that 10% inflation wasn't very much appreciated.
I see. Speaking of which, I mean, it's not a pox, but I just watched another interesting TV series the other week, and as I said, we won't go into the details because it's not a POX, but if you're interested in the brutal, true version of history in the UK, Mary and George is not something to be missed.
Okay.
It's pretty explicit, let's put it this way. And not in a good way. Let's leave it at that. Links may or not be in the show notes. Anyway, back to the subject at hand.
So going back to the NHS briefly, take for example the use of the operating systems, databases. These are clearly already being have been being replaced over the last 10 years with Linux and with Postgres and things like that, right? But
also on the
where possible, right? Because desktops are all still Windows. There was a pretty high profile case a few years ago when there was a lot of hacking going on through Windows.
Really? Why is that, I wonder?
No. I think it was the Russians, actually. Anyway.
As usual.
Yes. Anyway, so so the other side of that is the research part, right? So clearly there was COVID a few years ago, and all these universities, Cambridge, Oxford, they all made use of open source libraries to speed up the process to diagnose this. So that's clear. Yeah, open source libraries are a kind of a must in this area because the development goes so quickly in those that legacy software is not going to be able to keep up anyway.
The question backs, of course, if they use open source software for the project, and I'm just talking about just inverted commas, of course, and we're just talking about the universities, do they contribute back?
Okay. So there are a number of projects that are being built that are open source, right? So it's even for the NHS apps as well, the whole patient ID stuff, all these kind of things, apps on phones that people use, they're all being open source, which is quite useful in a way. What about Germany, though? It's kind of a slightly different system over there, isn't it?
Yes, Germany is a totally different ballgame because the medical research is actually split between universities and publicly funded, most of the time government-owned companies like the MPI, the Max Planck Institute, and all the rest of it. And they have a long-standing tradition because, again, we're looking at taxpayers' money being used to fund the whole thing. And they have a long-standing tradition, basically, to put out the source code in the public domain.
Excellent.
And most of the time, actually publicly available on places like GitHub and stuff. But they are they're very close to industry. But the way I understand this, and I've been talking to them to one MPI about 15, 20 years ago, the idea was, of course, that although this is funded by the government and industry, I wouldn't say on par, but sometimes the industry chips in quite a few shillings in too. Most of the time, that means if there are no specific reasons against open sourcing this, normally these contracts would have a clause in them that any source code, never mind how it's funded, has to be in the public domain. If not being on a permissive license, copyleft license, you name it.
Okay, good. But yeah, so the whole health system is different anyway in Germany, isn't it? Where you have various levels of private insurance, is it something like that? Or?
Just to cover on just to touch on the very complicated subject of health cover in Germany, that's correct. In contrast to the UK, you have publicly, they're not publicly run, but basically you have a basic cover that everybody can avail of. And this is basically paid half between your employer and half between yourself being employed. And that gives you quite a good coverage in terms of outpatient treatment general kind of specialist treatment and also GP treatment. And then you have the private cover, which is comparable to the likes of Bupa and VHI in the UK, if you're familiar with that.
Of course.
So it's mostly related to inpatient treatments. Like that gets you, for example, private cover gets you a room in private wing of a hospital. Similar like in the UK or Ireland. Or I think in the US they have something similar, but I'm not too familiar with the details.
Oh, it's quite complicated in the US, isn't it? It's
probably, yeah.
Quite an expensive business as well. There's a lot of money in healthcare in the US.
Yeah, but there's not a podcast about different health coverage systems. But rather open source.
This is true.
Yes, very much so. So, switching over to actually companies.
Okay.
Like companies making moolah from selling kit. Like hardware manufacturers, like drug producers, like private research companies and all the rest of them. I mean, most of the time, at least in Germany, you have a bit of everything. If you take the big ones, like, okay, Roche is officially headquartered in Switzerland, but it's still kind of massively present in Germany too. They have a lot of research going on. So does Merck, Boehringer Ingelheim, just to name two additional ones.
Okay.
Yes, they're just based outside Mainz. So again, these are companies that are in the business basically of making drugs or producing kit or whatever, but still putting an awful lot of their IP actually in the public domain. For example, Roche and Boehringer Ingelheim, and of course links will be in the show notes, maintain quite actively Armada GitHub repos. Again, mostly focusing on genome sequencing, generally big data. So you would have a lot of R and Python in it. But funny enough, you will also find less established companies like the startups of Germany, like the ones like BioNTech, CureVac and all the rest of them are a little bit shy here. At least I couldn't find publicly available source code from BioNTech, for example, with regards to the infrastructure that they use for their mRNA research.
Okay, you may want to explain what mRNA is. But
when BioNTech was founded all these years ago, I think details maybe in the show notes, about 10 years ago, something like that. The idea was to develop a new cancer treatment in terms of you will spot a developing cancer by actually detecting it, and this is where the interesting part takes place, by then replacing some of his genome that will ultimately cause the cancer to die. But then something called, and I'm simplifying things, of course.
There
are lots of research papers published on the subject from BioNTech and other companies. But about 4 years ago, when COVID happened, they quickly caught on to the fact that this technology can also be used to produce vaccines for COVID. And that's exactly what happened. Moderna, CureVac, and BioNTech would probably be the 3 companies that come to mind immediately. All of them had been set up to cure something completely different, not COVID in the first place. Most of them were going for cancer research because this is basically what they thought there would be money in it. But then COVID happened, and all of these technologies could be used to produce vaccines for COVID as well. And that's precisely the reason why Mainz and other cities, I think there's a manufacturing plant of BioNTech in Marburg, are now thinking about 2 additional public pools and gold-plated door handles in every public sector building. Something like that.
Right.
With all the cash that they made over the last couple of years from, taxes, right? As in company taxes.
Yeah.
But before we close this off, we should probably touch the subject of open source software and hardware manufacturers as in companies that produce medical devices.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also there's a few specific Linux distributions with pre-built packages for like BioLinux and Debian Med and stuff like that. They're basically just standard distributions with additional software, but it's something that we should probably also mention.
Yes, links will be in the show notes. I came across that too, but yes, there's quite a lot of software, not specifically related to a company or a government body out there, that is just worth checking out if you're so inclined.
Yeah. But on the hardware side, yes, clearly there are many medical devices, whether they're in hospitals or related to patients, that run software, and most of those are kind of black boxes, right?
That's precisely the point. I mean, we covered this when we had Karen Sandler and Brad on the show quite a few moons ago. But for those of you who missed that episode, Karen Sandler was actually a pacemaker. When she found out that the source code of said pacemaker is not in the public domain as in publicly available, she immediately, and we should probably talk about who Karen Sanders and Brad are. They essentially run something called the Software Conservancy, Software Freedom Conservancy, sorry, it's late. And similar to the FSF, similar to the OSI, and again, I'm simplifying things. Links, of course, will be in the show notes. Said conservancy is at the heart of the open source as in free software movement. And the idea to carry a device in your body that you cannot check out in terms of take a look at the source code and also assess the quality of that software made her quite angry, let's put it this way. And there has been a lot of campaigning in the US and beyond to ensure that that type of software actually belongs in the public domain. Never mind if it's done by a privately owned company or not.
Yeah. So what state is that in now?
The last I heard, they are still lobbying for a legislative change. But given the current turmoil with regards to upcoming elections and other stuff like in the US, never mind wars, it has probably slipped a little bit with regards to the priorities. It was very high up on the agenda prior to the war. Or to the wars, because there's more than one of them.
I was about to say which one we're talking about. Yeah. But yeah, okay. Yes. But I mean, it doesn't just. There are these devices you wear in your body, or even if you have an oxygen sensor device or a blood pressure.
Yes.
Anything
comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's also hospitals have many medical devices which are all built and sold by commercial organizations. But
quite a few medical companies come to mind that actually issue medical devices that people use at home, for example, to administer certain work. At the very same time, that medical devices also takes vital signs like blood pressure and oxygen saturation, all the rest of it. Again, most of the time, that software is not in the public domain.
No, which is clearly, a problem, but it's not an easy. There is no easy solution, right? If you're in a hospital and you need a machine, you need a machine, right? Because you need the machine for a certain purpose, and yes, you have to, unless there are alternatives, which usually there aren't. There are only a limited amount of manufacturers of these devices, right? So it's kind of an industry that probably perpetuates itself by keeping all that closed.
I mean, there's quite an easy way out. Just nationalize them.
Yes. But then, you probably heard of Philips, right? Which is the Dutch electronics organization. They create a lot of, or they build a lot of medical devices.
I know.
So, but yeah, if you're in the UK, you can't really nationalize a Dutch company.
No, you do that actually in the Netherlands. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where they are still headquartered, I think.
Indeed. But yeah, as a UK buyer, you don't really have any say in the matter.
Well, again, you could try to invade Holland.
People have tried this in the past. It didn't.
Yeah, it didn't work. I know. People, that was a joke. Do not try to invade the
No,
Netherlands.
no.
If you're living in the UK or elsewhere, no, just don't do it.
Indeed.
Okay, no, jokes aside, but I think you can joke all you want, but I think that issue is just too important to be left alone.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there's no really one organization that's looking after this issue or trying to change it.
Yes.
So there's clearly a gap there. I mean, we have the FSFE, we have many open source organizations, but none of them are specifically looking after this issue.
Well,
as far as I know.
The Register had an opinion piece at the beginning of this year, as in 2024, that again re-emphasized Karen Sandler's point. Links, of course, will in the show notes. But again, never mind the current state of things in the US and elsewhere. I mean, if there are potentially lives on the line, and that's exactly the point. You want to make sure that you minimize the risk, and this is something hard to do if you don't have access to the source code. Simple as that.
Yep. Yeah, very true.
There's this beautiful website called change.org, right?
Do tell.
It's a petition website. So, and for example, many people use this to made a point about Julian Assange quite some time back now, I might add.
Okay, did it work?
As far as I know, he's not been extradited to the US, and I mean, you're talking about at least a couple of years back. But the latest actually is that Biden is reconsidering whether to take a strong stand on this. Right. Because again, I think he's different priorities at the moment with regards to what stuff to worry about.
Yeah.
And as we all know, quite a few Democrats are quite happy with Julian Assange being in the UK, or for want of a better location, being in Australia, where he originally comes from.
I don't know where he is these days. I know he was in the UK for a while, but he got moved, didn't he?
He's still being held in that prison, if I'm not completely mistaken.
I thought it was in some South American country. Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
No, they granted them asylum, but I think he's been held in that
okay.
high security prison somewhere outside London, if I'm not completely mistaken. But again, maybe details may want to put in the show notes.
Okay. So clearly in need of some kind of organization to look after this stuff, right?
Indeed. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up, Martin?
Final thoughts are really, I mean, it's an interesting field anyway. If you just look into the whole development of all the libraries and the research for drug development and all these kind of things, it's a very fast-moving organization category. The usual sort of man on the ground, or the organization on the ground, the hospitals, the healthcare providers, they are a different matter, right? They still very much rely on handwritten notes and all that kind of stuff, but there are some great advances being made based on software in that area for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And now for the feedback.
The feedback. Oh,
yes.
Detail.
So somebody, as I said, somebody high up the food chain, actually, from Redis wrote.
Oh. A particular somebody?
Yes, but I can't. Because of the nature of the content, I can't reveal.
All right, let's deal with the content name first, and then you can reveal the name. Yeah, okay.
I won't. So basically, he got in touch and said, "No, look, great episode." And then we got talking, and I said, "I've listened to a one-time caller," and he wrote back, "Occasional listener, obviously interested in the subject area you chat about, as well as interesting in both your viewpoints." And then we talk about
Eastern
the episode.
European, then, I see. Okay.
Yes, he's Southern European. Yes, I think. Anyway, and he just continues. This was a must listen to Of course, not sure I agree with all of it, of course, especially the actual limitations and practical differences between BSD and Redistor's available license version 2, but opinions are opinions. That's the beauty. And that's the feedback. Fake Italian accent added for dramatization purposes only. Done by trained professionals. Do not try this at home, kids.
Okay. Right.
Martin doesn't know what to make of it. No.
Well, I was expecting some kind of, I had a very strong opinion on the whole.
Well, you see, given his position, he must be balanced in terms of he looks at things from both sides. Let's put it this way.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, we can all
any
look
more
at it on both
details?
sides.
Exactly, and revealing any more details will give away who he really is. So we're going to leave it at that.
All right, fair enough. Well, anyway, good of her to write in.
Exactly. If you're listening, mille grazie.
Oh, he's Italian. Okay, there we go.
Maybe.
I thought Salvatore didn't work.
Martin, have you looked at his LinkedIn profile? I wonder. It still says staff engineer at Redis.
Oh right, okay.
It does, yes. For whatever reasons, I do not know. But
maybe it just doesn't update LinkedIn. Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Yes. But I mean, Salvatore is not the only Italian working at the company, I suppose. Or used to work at the company anyway.
Yeah.
There were quite a few sales in America, I think, that were at least of Italian origin. And of course, you have Italian sales and you have an Italian solution architect down there, if I'm not completely mistaken. These days, anyway.
Entirely possible.
Mario. There was somebody also, and I think in enablement, because David talked about him. Mario something.
This is after.
Mirko is Italian, no?
Yes, that's an Italian name. Very good.
And I think he used to work for David in enablement, if I'm completely mistaken.
Right.
So the company does have quite a few Italians, all right.
But not that high on the food chain. Yeah, okay.
Well, you see, maybe people progress through their careers, no? If you know what I mean.
Anyway, enough speculation, but yeah.
Indeed. And with that, I think it's time for the boxes.
Ooh, do tell.
I think this is one of the weeks where I don't have a box at hand.
Oh right. How come?
No. It's I think the first episode with Crisco and Poxless. So Martin, what's your box?
My box is a series called Renegade Nell, which is set in the sort of Jacobite era of the UK, England, and it's quite amusing, really. It's a bit of fantasy, bit of black magic, bit of fantasy, quite amusing.
You're turning into a history buff. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think it's very loosely based on history.
I see. Okay, so I don't have to worry about it. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
No, it's worth a watch. I did enjoy it, for sure.
Links, of course, will be in the show notes. And with that, thank you for listening, people. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.